Good day, Africa, and welcome to AAU Talks here on AAU TV. And my name is Kwesi Sam. This morning we are looking at Agenda 2063, the role of the youth, and it's actually the continuation of the show we had last week, where we looked at the first and the second aspirations of the Agenda 2063. We'll go for a short commercial break, and when we return, I would introduce my guests who are ever ready to join us to have a beautiful discussion on the third and the fourth aspirations of Agenda 2063. This is AAU TV. You can join the conversation via our social media platforms, AAU on Facebook, and then AAU_67 on Twitter. After the commercial break, you'll get to know my guests. Stay tuned.
Anyone can get an education, but not everyone gets quality education. It's never too late to acquire it. The University of Lusaka, a modern private university located off Ali Kinkata Road in Lusaka, Zambia, offers undergraduate, master's, and PhD degree programs in the School of Business and Management, Law, Economics, Banking and Financial Services, Public Administration, Governance and International Relations, Education, Engineering and the Built Environment, and Health Sciences. Our curriculum is practical and designed to meet the changing needs of employers, business, and society. Because at Unilas, we make students think outside the book. Our driving force is a passion for quality education. We build graduates fit for purpose. Enroll now for January or June intakes. For more information, log on to www.unilas.ac.zm.
From the commercial break, and before we left for the commercial break, I told you my guests are ready, and so I would want to introduce them to you shortly, and then we start the discussion. We are looking at the third and the fourth aspirations of Agenda 2063. First to be introduced is our regular panel member, Ms. Irene Dufie, who is a project manager or project officer here at the Association of African Universities. You are welcome, Ms. Adai.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Great. The second panel member to be introduced is Mr. Kweku Schneider, who is also a project management assistant here at the Association of African Universities. You are welcome, Kweku.
Thank you, Kwesi.
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Your smile tells me everything is okay.
Everything is okay.
Wonderful. Then the third panel member to be introduced is Mr. Samuel Ajapon. And Samuel Ajapon is also a project officer here at the Association of African Universities. Samuel, you are welcome.
Thank you, Kwesi.
Great. So this morning, I'm so happy that you could make it to the show. And this is a continuation of what we had last week, where we looked at the first two aspirations of Agenda 2063, where we are looking at the role of young people in achieving the agenda. But just a brief of a recap for our viewers who couldn't join us for the first show, we were looking at a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, where we were able to look at the issues and then what must be done to ensure that we get to the Africa we want by the next 50 years. And then we also went ahead to look at an integrated continent that is politically united based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and that African Renaissance, where we looked at we championing our own values and our customary rights and everything as Africans, and believing in what we have and what we can do to spearhead our own growth and development as Africans. Today we are moving a step further to look at the third and the fourth aspiration. And I love the fourth aspiration, which says that Africa must be peaceful. A peaceful continent where anybody at all on the globe can just come into Africa. And the third aspiration, we are looking at how we can guard ourselves, protect our values, and also make sure that we allow rule of law to work on our continent, where we are promoting good governance, because we believe that if we have good governance, then all the other spheres of development will follow. Let me start with you, Mr. Ajapon,
Yes.
just as I do almost all the time. Let me just, for the purpose of our viewers to know the third aspiration. The third aspiration talks about an Africa of good governance,
Yes.
democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. As young people, how can we ensure that this aspiration is achievable before the next 50 years?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Like you rightly said, as young people, what can we do? Most often, when it comes to developmental policies, we normally do the top-down approach. But then let's have a good look at this issue. Let's look at it from the bottom up. What are the youth doing?
Okay.
What am I doing? What are you doing, Kwesi? One, we need to educate ourselves about the policies and also take hold of the policy and implement advocacy plans for it. Okay, so governments are engaged in, or let's say in the political season, they use these youth to do a lot of crime, and then also they instigate a lot of violence in our country. How can we ensure good governance as youth? Let's not engage ourselves in these kinds of politics. Let's rather address issues. Let's focus on issues on how we can develop our nation. And this in all goes together and then brings peace into our various countries. So for the African youth, it is important to, one, educate ourselves on these policies, and then also undertake advocacy programs in order towards which will lead to good governance across the continent. Thank you.
Let me take your perspective, Mr. Ankomah. We have a universal culture of good governance. What must be done?
Okay, thank you, Kwesi. Kwesi, the aspiration, we aspire that in Africa we're going to have capable institutions first in place, and then we also want to have transformational leadership at all levels and then in all fields. So talking about the fields, if you come to the country, let's take the structure of the country for instance. We have the presidency, that is one form of leadership in Africa. We also have religious institutions, we have academic institutions, we have a whole lot of institutions, and we have leaders in all these institutions. And we're saying that we aspire to have transformational leadership in all these fields. But then, most in Africa, we have this erroneous thinking that leadership is always at the presidency. But that is not the case. And so we are always looking at the president to implement policies that will cause a change or a transformation in all the levels. But that is not the case. You have an academic institution. You have the vice chancellor, that is the leader. And then we also have the registrars, head of departments. They are all leaders in that field.
Okay.
We expect that all of them will be transformational. You come to the religious side, we have pastors, we have imams, we have the traditionalists. They are all leaders in their own fields. And then we expect that they're going to be transformational in whatever they do. That way, looking at the general picture, we are going to transform Africa. Now, coming to the role of the youth. In terms of governance, I want to leave the other parts to Irene, and then, looking at the leadership. We see, in Africa, we the youth, sometimes we sit back and then we expect the government to do everything for us. We fail to recognize that we are also leaders in our own fields. Let's go to our institutions, for instance, our universities. We have leaders, SRC presidents. They are leaders. If you go to these national unions, we have the National Students' Union. So
across the continent.
Across the continent. Likewise, we have some in Ghana. They are all leaders, and then they're supposed to recognize that they are leading an institution. And they shouldn't sit and expect the government to initiate policies before they pick up. They need to be transformational in their position that they've been given. That's what we, the youth, must do. By that, we are setting example for the others to also follow, because we are the youth, and then the agenda is speared towards the youth. So I expect that, the youth will also take care of wherever they find themselves and then lead in a transformational way.
So just as brightening the corner wherever you find yourself.
Yes.
That's great. Let me get to you, Ms. Dufie. Let me take your initial comment or your initial thought on good governance.
Okay. First of all, I will start by acknowledging what is happening in Nigeria, and as the age gap has been reduced on presidency, governorship, and senateship in Nigeria. The age has been reduced to include the youth, starting from 30 years to 45, I think, for the president, 40 for the president. And this is including the youth in the governance process. Most times we leave it for the old people to do it, but as we are now, in this globalized system, I think they are really outmoded, they are outdated, and it is up to the youth to take on the mantle of leadership to ensure good governance. So I think, first of all, my first comment will be congratulations to Nigeria on passing this wonderful constitution to help the youth be part of good governance. You know, when we talk of rule of law, it's both the citizenry and it's also the government machineries to obey laws. And when this is effectively done in Africa, I think first of all, we would have justice served, we would have people who are happy with what is going on in the country. And then when people are happy and when people are satisfied, it brings development, it brings improvement in every aspect of the economies. Yeah.
All right. So you raise a very beautiful point, and that has to do with the fact that we should allow the young people to be part of governance in Africa. But then I am not disputing that fact that having young people in governance automatically means that there'll be good governance, because there has been instances where young people have been given platforms, opportunities, and they did even much more worse than the older people. Okay. Let me take your view, Mr. Agyapong. How will we ensure that young people who are coming up are being groomed to make sure that they ensure that when they're given the opportunity, they spearhead wherever institution that they will be given to, they will make sure that there is good governance for the continent?
Okay, so it goes back to my point again: education, 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 and then giving them the chance for them to also show their skill or demonstrate their skill, like Dufie rightly said. So you pass a policy whereby age has been reduced, but then do the people have the capacity? Because even if you are going to look for a job, it's there, 3 years of working experience. Have I been put in that position whereby I exhibited good governance qualities or good qualities of leadership? No. Leadership needs to be groomed, or a leader needs to be groomed. So what are we doing as a continent in grooming this leadership? That's why I'm always happy when these topics come about, because AAU, for instance, has a lot of programs whereby youth leaders are being groomed from, let's say, basic leadership training to the advanced level. So I think there's a program which is also going to be organized by the AAU for continental educational leaders. So I think education and then grooming the next generational leadership is the key when it comes to getting good governance across the continent.
Okay. Yes. Let me get to you, because if you are looking at an Africa which has good governance, democracy, and the respect for human rights, then gender inequality also comes in. How well have we been able to deal with gender inequality on the continent?
Kwesi, I will answer the question of gender equality, but then let me go back
touch on what Sam
said. Good. You were worried about the fact that we give the mantle to the youth and then they are not able to deliver, so they flatter to deceive. The issue has been that we, the youth, do not feel confident enough, we do not feel competent enough that we can handle the leadership positions when they are given to us. Let's take instances of these national leadership positions, student unions. Right now, we have a student leader that is being sponsored by a political party to lead, okay? And so the person comes to power, and then the policies that the person is implementing, or the things that the person is pushing for, is not motivated by the person himself or the people the person is leading. It's being motivated by the leader, the party machinery. Yes. So we have a youth that is leading the youth, and we expect them to implement policies that favors the youth, but then they're taking instructions from the older generations. You see the point? So most of the time, they end up leading exactly what the older generation is doing, and that is a problem. And so maybe if we're going to address that issue, leaders in Africa need to be competent enough. The youth need to be competent enough. They need to be independent from these political parties and then the influences of the older generation, and then take leadership as something we can do. And then make
I think our thoughts are not being fair.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, we are not being fair to the youth. I don't think youth are fallen